She thought she was just asking for a place to sleep for the night, but that one phone call would put her life in front of someone who could change everything. No one ever expects their lowest moment to be witnessed by the one person who holds the power to rewrite their future. Sophia Bennett held her phone tightly, her fingers trembling as she stood near gate C-17, the overhead lights of the airport casting a cold, sleepless glow across the nearly empty terminal. Her 6-year-old son, Liam, rested against her shoulder, half asleep, his small backpack slipping down his arm as she adjusted her grip. She glanced at the departure board again, even though she already knew what it would say. Delayed. 12 hours. Overnight. Her stomach tightened. She checked her wallet for the third time in 10 minutes, as if somehow more money might appear. It didn't. $32. Not enough for a hotel, barely enough for food. She swallowed hard and opened the airline app, her thumb hovering before finally pressing the call button. The ringing felt louder than it should have been, echoing in her chest as she tried to steady her voice. When the line connected, she hesitated for a second too long. I know this might sound strange, she began, her voice soft but strained, but is there any way at all that my son and I could stay on the plane overnight? We don't have anywhere else to go. There was a pause on the other end. A long one. Sophia closed her eyes, already bracing for rejection, for policy, for rules that didn't care about tired children or exhausted mothers. Ma'am, that's not something we typically allow, the voice replied, polite but firm. Her heart sank, but she pushed forward anyway, because sometimes asking was all you had left. I understand. I really do. I just need somewhere safe for him to sleep. Even a seat. We won't cause any trouble. As she spoke, a man seated a few rows away quietly lowered the tablet he'd been reviewing. Alexander Hayes had boarded early under a different name, choosing to observe rather than announce himself. He had heard countless customer service calls before, but something in Sophia's voice made him pause. It wasn't just desperation. It was restraint, the kind that comes from someone who has already been told. No too many times. He stood slowly, stepping just close enough to hear more without being noticed. On the phone, the agent sighed softly. Let me check something, she said, placing Sophia on hold. The soft instrumental music filled the silence, and Sophia looked down at Liam, brushing his hair gently from his forehead. It's okay, she whispered, more to herself than to him. Across the gate, Alexander watched, his expression unreadable, but his mind already turning. Policies were clear, but so were choices, and tonight, he was about to decide which one mattered more. The whole music seemed to stretch longer than time itself, each soft note pressing heavier against Sophia Bennett's chest as she shifted her weight from one foot to the other, trying not to wake Liam completely, while also trying not to lose the last bit of composure she had left, because she knew that the moment her voice broke, the answer on the other end might become even easier to deny. Around her, the airport had grown quieter, the usual rush replaced by scattered travelers curled up in chairs or pacing slowly with tired expressions, and for a moment, she wondered if she should just accept that this was how the night would go, sitting upright under fluorescent lights, counting the hours until morning, hoping Liam would not wake up cold or confused. Then the line clicked back. Ma'am, thank you for holding, the agent said, her tone slightly different now, more cautious, almost as if someone else was listening. Sophia straightened a little. Yes, I am here. There was another pause, shorter this time. I cannot guarantee anything yet, the agent continued, but I am going to speak with a supervisor. Please stay on the line. Sophia nodded instinctively, even though she knew the woman could not see her. Thank you. Really, thank you. A few feet away, Alexander Hayes had already stepped aside, his phone pressed to his ear, speaking in a low, controlled voice that carried none of the authority it actually held. Authorized temporary accommodation on aircraft for delayed passengers in exceptional cases, he said quietly. There was a brief silence on the other end before a response came, immediate and respectful. Understood. He ended the call without another word and glanced back toward Sophia, who was still standing there, unaware that the policy she was waiting on had just shifted. Because of her. When the agent returned again, her voice now carried a subtle warmth. Ma'am, We're going to make an exception for you and your son tonight." For a second, Sophia did not respond, as if the words had not fully reached her yet. "I am sorry, could you repeat that?" "You and your son will be allowed to remain on the aircraft overnight. A crew member will assist you shortly." The breath Sophia had been holding finally escaped, shaky and uneven. "Thank you. Thank you so much. You have no idea what this means to me." She lowered her phone slowly, her eyes glistening as she looked down at Liam, gently kissing the top of his head. "We're going to be okay tonight," she whispered. Across the gate, Alexander watched the moment unfold, not with pride, but with a quiet recognition of how small decisions could carry weight far beyond policy manuals and balance sheets. Yet he did not step forward, did not reveal himself, because he knew something Sophia did not. This night was not going to end with just a place to sleep. It was only the beginning of something she would never expect. The cabin lights were dimmed to a soft amber glow as Sophia Bennett carefully followed the flight attendant down the narrow aisle, her steps slow and quiet, so she would not disturb Liam, who had now fully fallen asleep against her shoulder, his small hand gripping the fabric of her jacket, as if afraid she might disappear if he let go. The hum of the aircraft systems created a steady, almost soothing background noise, and for the first time in hours, Sophia felt a fragile sense of relief begin to settle in her chest. "You can sit anywhere in this section," the attendant said gently, gesturing toward a row of seats near the middle of the plane. "We'll bring you a blanket and some water." Sophia nodded quickly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you. I really appreciate this." She eased Liam into the seat, carefully adjusting the armrest and using her folded sweater as a pillow beneath his head. He stirred slightly, his eyes fluttering open for a second. "Mom, are we on the plane?" he murmured. Sophia smiled softly, brushing his hair back. "Yes, we are. You can go back to sleep. Everything is okay." Within seconds, he drifted off again, his breathing slow and steady. Sophia sat beside him, exhaling deeply as she leaned back for the first time that day, staring up at the overhead panel as if trying to process how quickly everything had shifted. Just an hour ago, she had been preparing for the worst, and now she was sitting inside an aircraft, safe, warm, and surrounded by a quiet she had not expected to find. A few rows behind her, Alexander Hayes took his seat without drawing attention, his presence blending in with a handful of other passengers who had been granted the same exception, though none of them knew why the rules had suddenly bent in their favor. He watched as the attendant returned, placing a neatly folded blanket over Liam and handing Sophia a bottle of water. "If you need anything else, just press the call button," she said with a reassuring smile before moving on. Sophia wrapped the blanket more securely around her son, her movements careful and instinctive, shaped by years of doing everything on her own. She glanced around the cabin, noticing how different it felt from the busy chaos of earlier, and for a brief moment, her eyes landed on Alexander. He looked away almost immediately, as if he had simply been another tired traveler passing the time. But there was something in that brief exchange that made her pause. Not suspicion, not recognition, just a quiet sense that she was not entirely invisible in this moment. She turned her attention back to Liam, gently holding his hand, her thumb tracing small circles against his skin as her thoughts drifted. She thought about the job interview waiting for her in the morning, the one opportunity she could not afford to miss, the reason they had taken this trip in the first place. Everything depended on it. Across the aisle, Alexander leaned back in his seat, his gaze unfocused as he considered what he had just set into motion. Helping her for one night had been easy, temporary, contained. But something about Sophia Bennett told him her story did not end here, and for reasons he could not fully explain yet, he was not planning to let it. Somewhere in the quiet middle of the night, when the cabin had settled into a deep stillness, and even the faint engine hum seemed softer, Sophia Bennett's eyes slowly opened as if her body refused to fully rest, trained by years of responsibility to remain alert even in the rare moments of safety. And for a second she did not move, just listening, making sure Liam was still breathing steadily beside her, making sure nothing had changed, because too often in her life, calm moments did not last long. She shifted slightly in her seat, adjusting the thin blanket around her shoulders, and glanced out the small, oval window beside her, where the dark runway lights flickered faintly in the distance, reminding her that they were still grounded, still waiting, still somewhere in between where they were and where they needed to be. Her mind drifted back to the morning ahead, to the address she had memorized, to the building she had only seen in photos, to the interview that could mean stability, a steady income, and finally a place where she and Liam would not have to keep starting over. She closed her eyes again, whispering quietly to herself, "Just get through tomorrow." A few rows back, Alexander Hayes had not slept at all. He sat upright, one arm resting against the armrest, his gaze fixed forward but unfocused, as if he were replaying something over and over in his mind. Not a business decision, not a quarterly report, but a simple question that had come from a voice filled with quiet desperation. He had built his company on efficiency, on structure, on policies that ensured consistency across thousands of employees and millions of passengers. Yet tonight, one exception had cut through all of that, and instead of feeling like a risk, it felt necessary. He reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone, scrolling briefly before stopping at a profile that had already been quietly pulled up for him earlier. Sophia Bennett. Limited information, no corporate connections, no special status, just a single mother traveling for what appeared to be a job opportunity. He studied the details for a moment before locking the screen again, his expression tightening slightly, not out of doubt, but out of recognition of how many stories like hers existed without ever being noticed. In the front of the cabin, a flight attendant walked softly down the aisle, checking on passengers, and when she passed Sophia, she paused just long enough to make sure the blanket was still covering Liam properly, adjusting it with a small, careful movement before continuing on, unaware that her simple gesture was part of a much larger decision unfolding behind the scenes. Time passed slowly, measured not by clocks but by the shifting weight of exhaustion, until eventually the first faint hint of morning began to creep into the sky, a pale blue glow replacing the darkness outside the windows. Sophia stirred again, this time fully waking, her eyes blinking as she took in her surroundings, and for a brief moment, she forgot where she was before everything came rushing back. The delay, the call, the unexpected kindness. She looked down at Liam, who was still asleep, peaceful in a way she had not seen in days, and a small, relieved smile formed on her face. Across the aisle, Alexander noticed the moment she woke, his posture straightening slightly, as if preparing for something even he had not fully decided yet, because the night had given him time to think, and the morning was going to demand action. The first rays of morning filtered through the aircraft windows, casting a pale golden light across the cabin as Sophia Bennett carefully stretched her arms, trying not to disturb Liam, who was just beginning to stir beside her, his eyes slowly opening as he looked around in confusion before recognition settled in. "Mom, do we sleep on the plane?" he asked softly, his voice still heavy with sleep. Sophia smiled gently, brushing his hair back. "Yes, we did. And you did great." For a brief moment, everything felt calm, almost hopeful, until her phone buzzed sharply in her hand, breaking the quiet like a sudden crack in glass. She glanced at the screen, her heart instantly tightening as she saw the email notification. It was from the company she was supposed to interview with. Her breath caught as she opened it quickly, her eyes scanning the message once, then again, as if hoping she had misunderstood. "We regret to inform you." The words blurred together as her chest tightened. The interview had been canceled. Position filled. No reschedule. No second chance. For a second, she could not move, her mind going completely still as the weight of that single message erased the fragile hope she had been holding onto all night. Liam looked up at her, sensing the shift immediately. "Mom? What is wrong?" She forced a smile that did not quite reach her eyes. "It is nothing, sweetheart. Just a change of plans." But inside, everything was collapsing again, faster this time, because she had allowed herself to believe that this trip meant something more. A few rows away, Alexander Hayes noticed the subtle change in her expression, the way her shoulders stiffened, the way her eyes lost that small spark of relief they had held just moments ago. He stood slowly, stepping into the aisle as if simply stretching his legs, but his attention remained fixed on her. That was when the second disruption came, sharper and more immediate. A uniformed airline supervisor approached from the front of the cabin, her expression professional but tense. "Excuse me," she said, addressing Sophia directly. "We need to ask you to gather your belongings. The aircraft needs to be cleared immediately." Sophia blinked in confusion, still processing the email, now hit with another sudden change. "I thought we were allowed to stay until boarding," she said quietly, her voice uncertain. The supervisor shook her head slightly. "There's been an update. Maintenance requires access sooner than expected. I am sorry, but you will need to exit now." The words landed heavily, stacking on top of everything else, and for a moment, Sophia just sat there, frozen between disbelief and exhaustion, as if her body had reached its limit of absorbing disappointment. Liam gripped her hand a little tighter. "Mom, are we in trouble?" he whispered. Sophia swallowed hard, shaking her head quickly. "No, we are not. It is okay," but did not feel okay. It felt like everything was slipping again, like every small bit of stability she had been given was being taken back just as quickly. Across the aisle, Alexander's expression shifted, no longer distant, no longer observational. This was no longer about policy. This was no longer a quiet exception made in the background. This was the moment where a decision had to become visible. He stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "I think there has been a misunderstanding." The supervisor turned toward him, slightly surprised, not yet realizing who she was speaking to. And in that brief second, everything was about to change again. The supervisor paused, clearly not expecting to be challenged, especially not by someone who appeared to be just another passenger, and she straightened slightly, maintaining her professional tone. "Sir, this is a maintenance directive. We need all passengers to deplane immediately." Alexander Hayes held her gaze calmly, his posture relaxed, but his presence suddenly carrying a weight that had not been there before. "I understand directives," he replied evenly, "but I also understand who approved the exception for them to remain overnight." The supervisor hesitated for a fraction of a second, just enough to reveal uncertainty. "And who would that be?" she asked, her voice more cautious now. Alexander reached into his jacket and pulled out a slim card, handing it to her without urgency. She took it, glanced down, and in that instant the shift was undeniable. Her expression changed completely, her posture tightening, her voice lowering. "Mr. Hayes, I did not realize." Around them, the quiet cabin seemed to hold its breath. Sophia, still seated with Liam beside her, looked between them, confusion written across her face as she tried to piece together what was happening. Alexander did not raise his voice, did not create a scene, but the authority in his words was unmistakable. "The authorization for this exception came from me," he said simply. "And unless there's a safety issue that I am not aware of, I would like that authorization to be respected." The supervisor nodded quickly, her earlier firmness replaced with careful deference. "Of course. I will confirm with maintenance and adjust accordingly." She stepped aside, already reaching for her radio, her tone shifting as she spoke quietly into it. Within moments, the urgency that had filled her earlier approach dissolved into controlled coordination, and the tension that had settled over Sophia began to ease, though her confusion only deepened. She looked at Alexander as he turned slightly toward her, and for a brief moment, their eyes met again, but this time it felt different. I am sorry," Sophia said instinctively, unsure of what she was apologizing for, but feeling as though she had somehow caused a disruption. Alexander shook his head gently. "You have nothing to be sorry for." Liam looked up at him, curious but calm. "Mom, who is that?" he whispered. Sophia hesitated, lowering her voice. "I do not know," but something inside her told her that answer was about to change. A few minutes later, the supervisor returned, her tone now respectful and composed. "There's been a revision. You may remain seated until boarding begins. We apologize for the inconvenience." Sophia nodded slowly, still processing everything. Her emotions tangled between relief and uncertainty. As the supervisor walked away, Alexander remained standing for a moment longer before taking a step closer, just enough to speak without drawing attention from others. "I believe your morning has already been difficult," he said calmly. Sophia let out a quiet breath, the weight of the canceled interview still fresh in her chest. "It has been more than I expected." He studied her expression briefly, then asked, "Was that opportunity important to you?" The question caught her off guard, not because of what he asked, but because of how directly he asked it. She nodded. It was everything. There was no hesitation in her answer, no attempt to downplay it. Just truth. Alexander gave a slight nod, as if confirming something to himself. "Then perhaps it is not gone," he said quietly. Sophia frowned slightly, not understanding what he meant, but before she could ask, he had already stepped back, returning to his seat as if nothing had happened, leaving her with a question that lingered heavier than any answer she had received so far. The words he left behind did not fade as quickly as his footsteps, and Sophia Bennett found herself sitting there, staring ahead without truly seeing anything, her mind replaying what he had said over and over again, as if trying to unlock a meaning that felt just out of reach, because nothing about that moment made sense, not the way the supervisor had reacted, not the way the situation had suddenly reversed, and certainly not the quiet certainty in his voice when he suggested that something she had already lost might still exist. Liam tugged gently on her sleeve, pulling her back from her thoughts. "Mom, are we still going on the trip?" he asked, his eyes wide with innocent concern. Sophia blinked, forcing herself back into the present, and gave him a small, reassuring smile. "Yes, we are still going. We just have to take it one step at a time." But even as she said it, she was not sure what that next step would look like anymore. Across the aisle, Alexander Hayes sat down again, his expression calm, but his attention fully engaged now, no longer observing from a distance, but actively shaping what would come next. He picked up his phone once more, typing a brief message, precise and intentional, before sending it without hesitation. Within seconds, a response came through, confirming that the request had been received and was already being processed. He locked the screen and leaned back slightly, his gaze drifting once again toward Sophia, not out of curiosity anymore, but with purpose. Time moved forward, and the cabin slowly began to come back to life as morning operations resumed, flight attendants preparing for boarding, announcements echoing faintly through the overhead speakers, signaling that the pause between night and day was ending. Sophia helped Liam sit up properly, smoothing his clothes and quietly organizing their few belongings. Her movements automatic, but her mind still unsettled, caught between gratitude for what had already happened and anxiety about what came next. Then, just as she was about to stand, a flight attendant approached her again, this time with a different energy, more attentive, more deliberate. "Ms. Bennett?" she asked gently. Sophia looked up, surprised. "Yes." The attendant smiled politely. "There has been an update regarding your travel arrangements. We would like to invite you and your son to the front cabin before boarding begins." Sophia frowned slightly, unsure she had heard correctly. "The front cabin?" The attendant nodded. "Yes, ma'am. Please bring your belongings. We will assist you." For a moment, Sophia did not move, her instincts telling her that this was not something that happened without a reason, and almost without thinking, her eyes shifted toward Alexander. He did not look at her directly this time, but there was a subtle awareness in his posture, as if he already knew what she was thinking. Liam's face lit up with quiet excitement. "Mom, does that mean better seats?" he whispered. Sophia let out a soft breath, still trying to process it all. I think so." She stood slowly, gathering their things, her heart beginning to beat a little faster, not from fear this time, but from the unfamiliar feeling that something unexpected, something bigger than she could explain, was unfolding around her. As she followed the attendant toward the front of the aircraft, she could not shake the feeling that the man she had spoken to moments ago was somehow connected to all of this. And for the first time, she realized that whatever was happening was no longer just about a delayed flight or a missed opportunity. Something else had begun, and she was right in the middle of it. The front cabin felt like a completely different world, quieter, brighter, and almost unreal compared to where Sophia Bennett had been sitting just minutes ago, and as she carefully guided Liam into the wide seat, her movements slowed, as if she were afraid that any sudden motion might break whatever invisible thread had led her here. Liam looked around with open amazement, his eyes wide as he gently touched the armrest. "Mom, this is so big," he whispered, his voice filled with wonder. Sophia managed a small smile, but her thoughts were racing, trying to connect everything that had happened, from the phone call to the supervisor, to the man who had stepped in without explanation, and now this. Nothing about it felt random anymore. A flight attendant approached with a warm, composed smile. "Ms. Bennett, can I get you or your son anything? Juice, water, maybe something to eat?" Sophia hesitated, instinctively wanting to decline, but Liam looked up at her with quiet hope. "Juice would be nice," she said softly. As the attendant walked away, Sophia sat down slowly, her hands resting in her lap, her posture still carrying the weight of uncertainty rather than comfort. She glanced toward the aisle, and this time, when Alexander Hayes stepped into the front cabin, there was no distance between them anymore. He had not passed by. He stopped directly beside her seat. "I hope this is a little more comfortable," he said calmly. Sophia looked up at him, her expression a mixture of gratitude and cautious curiosity. "It is more than I expected. Thank you, but I still do not understand." Alexander gave a slight nod, as if he had anticipated that. "That is fair." He took the empty seat across from her, not as a stranger anymore, but not yet fully revealing everything either. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke, the quiet filled only by the distant sounds of preparation outside the aircraft. Then Sophia spoke, her voice steady but honest. "When that supervisor spoke to you, she knew who you were." It was not a question. Alexander met her gaze directly. "Yes." The simplicity of his answer made the moment feel even heavier. Sophia's fingers tightened slightly in her lap. "And you approved everything last night, and now this?" Alexander did not look away. "Yes." There was no hesitation, no attempt to soften it. Just truth. Sophia let out a slow breath, her mind finally catching up to what her instincts had already been telling her. "Why?" The word came out quietly, but it carried everything she was feeling. Alexander leaned back slightly, his expression thoughtful, not rehearsed. "Because you asked for help without expecting anything more than a place for your son to sleep. And because you did not give up when it would have been easier to stay silent." Sophia's eyes softened, but the weight of her earlier disappointment resurfaced. "It did not change what happened this morning," she said, her voice lower now. "I lost the one opportunity one had." Alexander studied her for a moment, then reached into his jacket again, this time placing his phone on the tray table between them. He tapped the screen once and turned it slightly toward her. "That depends on how you define opportunity." Sophia leaned forward, her eyes focusing on the screen, and what she saw made her breath catch again, not from fear this time, but from something else entirely. The company name was the same, but the message was different. Not a rejection, not a cancellation, something else. And in that moment, she realized that the man sitting in front of her had not just changed her night. He was about to change everything she thought she had already lost. For a moment, Sophia Bennett could not speak, her eyes fixed on the screen as if the words might disappear if she blinked, because the message in front of her was not just different from the one she had received earlier. It was the complete opposite, a direct invitation for a private interview, rescheduled for later that same day, with a note that read, "We would like to personally meet with you upon your arrival," and beneath it, a name she recognized instantly, not from the email she had received before, but from the man now sitting across from her. She looked up slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. This is your company." Alexander Hayes did not react with surprise, only a calm acknowledgement. "Yes, it is." The realization settled over her in layers, each one heavier than the last, connecting every moment from the night before into something she could finally understand. The interview, it was not canceled, she said, more to herself than to him. Alexander shook his head slightly. It was redirected. Sophia let out a breath she did not realize she had been holding, her emotions shifting rapidly between disbelief, relief, and something deeper, something harder to name. "Why would you do this for me?" she asked again, her voice stronger now, searching for something that made sense in a situation that felt far beyond anything she had expected. Alexander leaned forward slightly, his tone steady but more personal than before. "Because I've spent years building systems that work efficiently, but not always compassionately, and last night, you reminded me what those systems are supposed to serve." Sophia's eyes softened, but she did not look away. "I was just asking for a place to sleep." Alexander gave a small, thoughtful nod. "Exactly." Liam, who had been quietly listening, looked between them with curiosity. "Mom, does this mean you got the job?" Sophia glanced down at him, her expression gentle but uncertain. "I do not know yet," she said honestly. Alexander's voice followed calmly. "It means she will be given a fair chance." The words carried weight, not as a promise, but as something more meaningful, an opportunity restored, not handed out. The boarding announcement echoed softly through the cabin, signaling that the flight would soon begin, but for Sophia, everything had already shifted. She sat back slowly, holding Liam's hand, her mind no longer focused on what she had lost, but on what was now possible again. As the plane began to fill and the final preparations were made, Alexander stood, straightening his jacket, his role returning to something more distant, more structured, yet still connected to the moment they had shared. He paused briefly beside her seat. "When we land, someone will be there to meet you," he said. Sophia nodded, her voice steady now. "Thank you, not just for this, but for seeing me." Alexander met her gaze one last time. "You made that part easy." He stepped away then, moving forward, leaving her not with uncertainty this time, but with something far more powerful, a sense that her story had not been defined by a single rejection, but reshaped by a moment she almost did not act on. As the aircraft doors closed and the engines prepared for departure, Sophia looked out the window again, but this time she was not thinking about how far she still had to go. She was thinking about how much had already changed in just one night, all because she chose to ask, even when she thought the answer would be no.